Good morning, everyone. Right, okay, so allegedly, apparently, Russia's invaded the Ukraine. Oh, by the way, sorry I haven't been around for a while. I've had a lot going on, and I'll touch on that after I've dealt with this one. Right, so Russia is moving troops into the Ukraine. Right, well, they moved in yesterday. So Putin's a really bad man. He's warmongering, he's invading the Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. But there is some history to this. And I'm just going to briefly outline it for you guys. So, Carl, thanks for the message. It was really nice to hear from you. And I'm doing well, mate. Very well. But I've had things going on. But like I said, talk to you. So, okay, so a little bit of the history on what's going on. So, I was watching this like 5-6 years ago when... to me, it looked like the CIA and, you know, the usual culprits went and decided they were going to oust the elected president of the Ukraine, who was very pro-Russian. And when the EU tried to get him to agree to come over to the European project, he said, no thanks, we'll stick with the Russians. Now, there's a lot of people that believe that those elections that elected that president were rigged. There was talk of rigged elections back in 2004, but then we had rigged elections apparently, allegedly, in America a few years ago, and possibly rigged elections for Brexit and possibly rigged, you know, there's always possibly rigged elections. So, but let's just get into the history of it a little bit. So, in 1762, Crimea was Russian. They sort of annexed it then, or I don't know the full circumstances around it. I don't really care because that's not important. What is important is in 1762, Crimea became a Russian territory. And it remained a Russian territory up until Khrushchev gave it away during the days of the USSR, so probably around 50 years ago, something like that. That's not overly important. The important aspect of this is that up until 50 years ago, those people that lived there and their families and their forefathers for 200 years have thought of themselves as Russian. So when the pro-Russian president was ousted by basically a bit of a putsch, really, he had to flee for his life to Russia. Now, I watched all this unfold at the time. I thought it was fascinating because I was really interested to see where this was going to go, because it was very reminiscent of the kind of things that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and a few South American nations and some other places, and it just looked like there were tentacles in there from a certain people's organisations. Anyhow, so I kept an eye on it, and it was really quite interesting. So this guy ran off, and then they had fair elections, and they elected a pro-European president, mysteriously. But at the time, I'm not sure if it was Clinton, but there was some Australian, some American foreign service individuals that were recorded having a conversation about this new president, and the long and the short of it was that he would do as he was told. Now, they were the words that were used, and I don't know if they applied that or said that he was a puppet, but basically the implication was he was their puppet and he would do as he was told, which basically tells you exactly what really happened with regards to this uprising from the Western Ukrainian mindsets. Now, up until Khrushchev gave the Crimea to Ukraine, because the Ukraine was always bitching in the days of the USSR that they never had anything, they didn't have any like resources, they didn't have good farmlands and all the rest of it, and he got fed up with it, so he gave them to Ukraine. If you want to know a bit more about that, go to Survival Russia. Survival Russia. It's a YouTube channel. I've been following him for years. I think it's Lars is his name, and he is a really, really nice bloke. And I think he's Norwegian, but he lives in Russia and has done for ages. And he does a breakdown on what is going on from the Russian perspective, and it's really very interesting, and it backs up what I'm telling you now. Anyhow, so when this new president came in, all of a sudden he was up for joining the EU. Now, the eastern states, which were basically the Crimea, didn't like this because, in their opinion, they're Russian. They speak Russian, they've got Russian lineages, they've always been Russian. So they said, no, you can't just kick out our president and then decide that's not on. So they decided that they were going to depart from Ukraine and join Russia. And they had free and fair elections, and it was something like 93% of the population voted to go to Russia. So what happened then was the Ukrainian government sent the Ukrainian forces to knock them into shape and, no, you're not going to Russia. Well, there's quite a lot of what was Russian bases down there at that point in time. So they just armed themselves very well, dug in and defended the eastern provinces, the two eastern provinces that wanted to secede. So they became rebels. Russia views them as Russians that want to be Russian. Ukraine views them as Ukrainians that are trying to rock the boat. The West views them as a nuisance. Russia looks at them as freedom fighters. The other aspect of this is that the minute the Ukraine became pro-European, the Americans were going to be putting their missile sites in. Now, these are missile sites that only shoot conventional missiles. But from everything I could figure out at the time, these conventional missiles can very easily be swapped over for tactical nuclear missiles. Now, I'm not sure the ranges, but if you imagine that this is the Russian border, including let's do it again. This is the Russian border with Ukraine, and that there is Ukraine. The Crimea is something like that much of it. So these missiles have gone from here to here. Now, if you imagine the extent of those missiles is to there, say, right, that's how much range they had. If you put them in here, they've got that much range. So it kind of becomes a bit like the Cuban Missile Crisis for the Americans. And nobody had an issue with them getting a bit antsy about that. So from a Russian point of view, tactically speaking, and in a defensive point of view, the Crimea and Ukraine becoming pro-European is a very bad thing when you consider that the whole of the western side of Russia has got missiles pointing at it from European, US interests. So there's a reason for Putin to be a bit nervous. Anyhow, so when all this happened and the civil war started, Russia stood loads of men on its borders. They've been there all along. Now, about a month ago, we in the West suddenly realised that with Omicron, there was no emergency anymore, so there's no boogeyman. And as a result, a lot of very influential people have started to really look at what's happened with regards to the reaction to COVID, or COVID-19. I don't want to call it COVID because there's loads of COVIDs and it's disingenuous. So COVID-19, which, for those of you that were watching me 2 years ago, know exactly what I thought about that then, and I think the truth of it coming out now says that I was on the money. The only reason I was on the money was because I was listening to the right people at the time. And it made sense at the time. So I'm not saying that I knew stuff that people didn't know. I just happened to be listening to the right people. Anyhow, as a result of that, it's becoming quite obvious that there are certain other reasons for our governments and those in power to be pushing these fairly draconian measures against us. So, that being the case, Russia's all of a sudden the new boogeyman, because fuck me, we can't have them looking at what happened with COVID. Now, this is, as far as I'm concerned, New World Order fucking 101. So with regards to Russia, I reckon Putin is going to push to the borders of those eastern states and hold, because I think with all the rhetoric that's been coming out over the last few weeks, what's actually probably happened is that the pro-Ukrainian forces have pushed very hard into the separatist areas. So they've said we need some help, and Putin is going to push them back to those borders and then say, right, that's it, we're done, let's have some peace now, this is enough. So for all of those that you're worrying about World War III, I doubt it, but if they do push it, yeah, it could be, because if Russia gets attacked, China's liable to step in, Iran is liable to step in, Syria is liable to step in, and I believe North Korea as well, because they've all got a little pact between them. That's a fucking scary prospect. But I don't think it'll happen, because nobody could be that fucking well, actually, no. Anyhow, so back to me, why I haven't been around recently. I haven't been around because, A, there's far more intelligent people than me that are far more in the know than me that have been talking about what's been going on in our world. And I'm only parroting what they've had to say. This one, I watched it unfold years ago. I've dug into the history of it. I know a bit about it. I can speak with not a degree of authority, but a degree of knowledge. And I think it's a storm in a teacup. So there's that reason for not getting involved in anything in the last little while. And the other one is that I've been pursuing a passion, a real passion of mine that I've had since I was a child. I've always had a drawing towards hunting, and in the UK, deer hunting is not a massive thing. It's not an easy thing to get into. A friend of mine's been deer stalking for 25 years or so. We're good mates, and he's really helped me out with that over the last 4 years, I suppose. And in order to effectively do deer stalking, you need to have your own firearms. Now, if I do a video that certain elements can say, ooh, that's right-wing extremism, then I could potentially lose my firearms certificate, which means my deer stalking days are pretty much over. And I've worked very, very hard to get this. It wasn't an easy thing. I didn't think I'd ever get it, to be fair, because I was a bit of a toe rag when I was younger. But I've been very well treated by all people involved, and been given that privilege. And I don't want to do anything that's going to rock the boat of that privilege. Plus, you all know that my theories on the future could be very bleak, and if that's the case, I'd rather be able to go and hunt some meat than not. So anyhow, look, it's nice to come back for a bit. The hair's looking awesome, I know. It's almost a flat top, but it won't be. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and don't let the fear get into you. Take care. Bye-bye.